Welcome to this custom tailored deep dive. Today we are looking at something really, really fascinating and honestly deeply personal.
Yeah, it's a totally unique set of sources today.
Right. So we're diving into two highly intriguing notes. They were sent from this anonymous account labeled beta account.
For March and April of 2026, right?
Right, exactly. And our mission for you today is to basically unpack this universal and frankly exhausting trap that so many of us fall into. Like, why do smart, ambitious people constantly prefer to fail by trying to reinvent the wheel from scratch?
Oh, the classic ego trap.
Yeah, the ego trap.
Yeah.
Rather than just succeeding efficiently by, following an established blueprint.
It is a phenomenal topic because
Yeah.
it strikes right at the core of how we perceive success, right?
Right.
Like an originality, too. We are really examining that precise mental friction between the ego's desperate need to be this, solitary pioneer and the cold, practical reality that the most effective leaders just leverage systems that already exist.
Yeah, they don't start from zero.
Exactly. And these two notes, they offer this unfiltered, real-time look at someone hitting that exact psychological wall, and then, thankfully, subsequently figuring out how to actually scale it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the first document we have, which is from Friday, March 27th, 2026, it is incredibly raw.
Very raw. The frustration just leaps off the page.
It really does. The subject line alone reads like, I don't know, the climax of a psychological thriller or something. It says, quote, JJ17, importance of following the leader. What, you mean you don't know everything? Unquote.
Wow.
Right, you can practically hear the realization just crashing down on the author.
You really can. That subject line captures such a pivotal breakthrough. That what you mean you don't know everything? That is the exact sound of an ego finally deflating after like a period of really intense, isolated struggle.
Yeah, that lone wolf mentality.
Precisely. Because when high achievers set out to build something, whether it's a new business venture or some complex piece of software or really any creative project, they so often fall victim to the myth of the lone genius.
Right, like they have to do it all themselves to get credit.
Exactly. They operate under this delusion that to create immense value, every single variable has to be generated entirely from their own intellect.
And when you operate that way, the cognitive load just becomes, it's completely unmanageable.
Totally unmanageable.
You aren't just trying to solve the core problem of your project anymore. You are forcing yourself to design every single background process at the exact same time. It actually reminds me of, when you buy a really complex piece of IKEA furniture?
Oh, no. Yeah, I know exactly where this is going.
Right. And out of sheer stubborn pride, you just throw the instruction manual straight into the recycling bin. Like, I don't need this. I'm a smart person. I can build a bookshelf.
I can figure out these wooden dowels, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then 4 hours later, your back is killing you. The shelves are upside down. And you have to do this shameful walk over to the trash to fish out the manual because you realize, oh, wait, this manual exists for a reason. Someone already figured this out.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And which brings us to the actual contents of that March 27th note.
Right.
Because once the author admits they don't know everything, they immediately, and I mean immediately, turn to structure.
Yeah, the manual.
Right. The body of the note is filled with these highly specific, almost cryptic lists. They start establishing all these categories, like there is a section labeled Ma with sub-items, number 1, store, number 2, air, 3, free, 4, va, and 5, de.
It's like they're mapping out a whole ecosystem, and it expands way further. We see another category called Ra that contains Sankara and Basa, and then Tia listing Bo of Boo, and finally Tias with Sko and Vit.
Yeah, it's a lot of acronyms.
It is. Now, obviously, we could spend hours attempting to decode these specific acronyms. Like store is obvious, right? Air might refer to air freight or some sort of logistics network.
Right, and Bo of Boo could easily translate to a book of business.
Yeah, exactly. But honestly, the literal translation of these acronyms is actually kind of secondary to the mental framework they represent.
What's fascinating here is the sheer mechanics of modularization. Like, we are witnessing the author's mental transition from an overwhelmed idealist to a really pragmatic systems architect.
Breaking it down into parts.
Exactly. They are taking this massive monolithic endeavor and compartmentalizing it into distinct, manageable units. And that active categorization, that separates the amateur who relies on chaotic inspiration from the professional who relies on reproducible systems.
It really is the anatomy of a system. I mean, think about how this applies to something like modern software development. If you are launching a new tech startup today, you do not build your own servers from scratch in a freezing garage.
No, of course not. You'd never get off the ground.
Right. You don't write a custom programming language before you even start making your app. You use established foundations. You host on AWS. You build the backend with Python or React. The blueprint is that shared, universally understood infrastructure.
And utilizing that shared infrastructure doesn't diminish the value of your software at all. It actually enhances it.
Because it saves time.
Not just time, but cognitive bandwidth. Instead of wasting thousands of hours figuring out, say, server security, which is a problem the industry already solved a decade ago, they can focus entirely on developing their proprietary algorithm or, the unique user experience.
Right. The stuff that actually makes them special.
Exactly. The ego trap is believing that true originality requires coding the entire operating system from absolute zero.
Which perfectly sets up this raw, almost painful admission at the very bottom of this first note, because after mapping out all these structural aponyms, the author leaves this visceral message to themselves.
Oh, this part is so good.
It really is. It reads, quote, "There's a ducking blueprint in play." Wait, no ellipses. It says there's a ducking blueprint in play. Follow it, you dumbass. Remember what Money said. It's always easier to follow something that's already been done.
The self-correction there is just incredibly stark. I mean, calling themselves a dumbass. That highlights the sheer frustration of realizing how much time and energy they just completely wasted fighting the obvious path.
And the reference to, quote, what Money said is particularly revealing, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Money in this context likely represents the objective feedback of the market, or maybe even a specific mentor who just understands commercial reality.
Because the market does not care about your ego.
Not even a little bit.
It doesn't care how hard you work to invent a brand new shape for a wheel. It only cares if the wheel actually turns smoothly.
Precisely. The principle is undeniable, right? Success leaves clues. The foundational mechanics of commerce, human behavior, project management, they have been battle-tested over centuries.
So the blueprint is real.
The ducking blueprint definitely exists. And it exists because thousands of people have already made the really expensive mistakes, they've optimized the processes, and they documented what actually generates a return on investment.
Okay, so if the ego is the primary barrier to accepting these blueprints, what does it actually look like to swallow that pride and adapt someone else's model without, totally losing your own identity?
Right, because that's the real fear for most creative or ambitious people.
Exactly. That is the fear, isn't it? Am I just becoming a clone?
No.
But I think that transition is perfectly resolved by the philosophy presented in our second piece of source material.
Yes, the second note. It provides an absolute masterclass in application. It's dated just a few days later, actually. Wednesday, April 1st, 2026.
And the subject line is JJ25. It is easier to follow a path already made.
Notice how the frantic, self-punishing energy of that March note has just completely dissipated here.
Yeah, it's gone.
It's replaced by this very calm, reflective tone centered around the lived wisdom of a really specific figure they introduce in the text.
Right, so we are introduced to Mike, and Mike is described as a 55-year-old barber who has been cutting hair since he was a preteen.
Which is wild.
It is. The note attributes this wisdom to him from a quote back in 2017. And for you listening, when you stop and consider that demographic, a 55-year-old who has been in the exact same trade for over 40 years, you are looking at the literal embodiment of compounding mastery.
Definitely. Mike represents someone who has survived every cultural trend, every economic cycle, and every shifting aesthetic in his entire industry. He truly understands the difference between just repeating 1 year of experience 40 times versus actually acquiring 40 years of deep synthesized mastery.
And Mike's central philosophy, which is quoted directly in the text, echoes that first note's realization. He says, easier to go down path already made than to recreate your own.
But Mike takes it a vital step further. He introduces the mechanism that saves the blueprint from just becoming a sterile clone.
Yes, the absolute core of the email is this specific phrasing. He says, look at path of others in different situations and recreate not, but add a sprinkle of newness life.
Recreate not, but add a sprinkle of newness life. It is such a deceptively simple sentence, but it contains an incredibly advanced framework for innovation.
But hold on, here's where it gets really interesting and where I kind of have to push back a little on Mike's behalf.
Sure, go for it.
So if I just take the exact blueprint from a market leader and paste it into my own operation, how do I avoid becoming just a generic copycat? Like if I use the exact same organizational chart, the identical marketing funnel, and the same supply chain as my biggest competitor, aren't I just building a transparent knockoff?
Are.
Where is the line between following a path and losing your competitive edge?
That is the pivotal question. It really is.
Yeah.
And it's precisely what Mike the Barber is solving when he explicitly warns to recreate not.
Recreate, not.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, he is distinguishing between the structural integrity of a system and its sociocultural interface.
Okay, so the blueprint provides the structural integrity, but the sprinkle provides the interface.
Exactly. Let's look at the geographical example provided right there in the note to make this concrete.
Right.
The author writes, X, location A, Jersey, who's there, B, Connecticut, who's there.
All right, let's break down the mechanics of that, moving from location A to location B.
So when a business or a creative project expands from New Jersey to Connecticut, the amateur mistake, which is driven by that same ego we discussed earlier, is assuming that just because the state line changed, you have to invent an entirely new paradigm to prove you are adapting.
Right, you throw out the blueprint.
Exactly. You throw it out.
Because, oh, well, Connecticut has a different median income or different weather, so clearly the foundational laws of physics and commerce must be completely rewritten.
Which inevitably leads to operational failure every time. Because the foundational mechanics of human desire, logistics, and unit economics, they do not drastically alter within a 2-hour drive along the East Coast.
No, they don't.
What does alter is the cultural context. The demographic makeup, the localized preferences, the community values, that prompt, who's there, forces you to analyze those specific hyperlocal variables.
Wow, okay. So human desire is universal, but human trust is hyperlocal.
That is a phenomenal way to synthesize it, yes.
Yeah.
The blueprint efficiently satisfies the universal desire. It handles the inventory, the accounting, the basic service delivery.
The boring stuff.
The essential, but yes, the boring stuff. The sprinkle of newness life is the mechanism that builds that hyperlocal trust. It's the adjustment to the marketing copy, the specific community partnerships you form, the cultural aesthetic of the storefront.
And it applies beautifully back to Mike's own profession, actually. I mean, think about it. The core mechanics of a haircut, the geometry of the scissors, the angle of the comb, the baseline techniques of doing a fade or a taper, those are centuries old.
Literally centuries.
That is the blueprint. But the conversation Mike has with the client in the chair, the specific atmosphere he cultivates in his shop on that specific Tuesday afternoon, the way he makes the community feel seen, that is the sprinkle of newness. He isn't reinventing the scissors.
No.
He is contextualizing the service.
Then that contextualization is where true sustainable creativity lives.
Yeah.
We have this really romanticized notion in our culture of generative creativity, right? This idea of conjuring something brilliant out of the absolute void.
Just a blank canvas.
Right. But in complex professional environments, the most impactful form of innovation is actually synthetic creativity.
Synthetic creativity, I like that.
It's the ability to take a known rigid structure and inject a novel, highly contextual variable into it.
It completely reframes the goal. It removes that paralyzing pressure of the blank page. Because when you sit down to write a massive corporate presentation or architect a marketing campaign, you don't need to invent a new language. You use the proven persuasive frameworks like the hero's journey or the problem-solution benefit model.
You trust the blueprint.
You trust the blueprint. Your only creative obligation is to synthesize those frameworks with the unique data of your current project.
And doing so preserve your absolute most valuable resource, which is your energy. Think back to the deep frustration of the author in that first note. Furiously trying to map out every logistical detail and calling themselves a dumbass for fighting the current.
Because when you try to generate everything from scratch, you just succumb to information overload.
Completely. You are researching the optimal angle of a scissor blade instead of actually cutting hair.
You get totally lost in the weeds of the infrastructure, completely neglecting the client interface.
By submitting to the blueprint, you outsource the heavy lifting of the infrastructure to the experts who came before you. You buy back your own cognitive bandwidth.
So you can actually focus on what matters.
Exactly. You can then spend 100% of your energy perfecting that sprinkle of newness, which, by the way, is the only thing the end user or the client actually feels and remembers anyway.
It is a profound shift in perspective. It really turns the entire concept of following the leader from an act of submission into an act of strategic leverage. You aren't surrendering your originality.
Not at all.
You are amplifying it by placing it on top of a really stable foundation.
Which is why the journey between these two notes from the spring of 2026 is so compelling. I mean, note one is that chaotic, ego-shattering collision with reality. It's the painful acceptance that isolated genius is a total myth and that systems rule the world.
And then note two is the peaceful, measured application of that reality. It is the realization that integrating an established system doesn't make you a drone. It makes you an incredibly effective synthesizer. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We have traveled from the raw, unfiltered frustration of a private inbox to the decades-earned practical wisdom of a master craftsman.
It means that if you want to achieve mastery in any field, whether you are building a startup, leading a corporate team, or executing a massive creative vision, you absolutely must embrace the dichotomy of the blueprint and the sprinkle.
You have to balance them.
Yes, you must have the humility to look at the market leaders and say, I don't know everything, let me analyze your architecture.
You adopt the Ma, the Ra, the Tia. You break the monolith down into manageable modules.
And simultaneously, you must have the confidence to analyze your specific environment, your location A versus your location B, and inject the precise sociocultural interface that only you can provide. You respect the established path, but you navigate it with your own unique cadence.
It is the ultimate antidote to burnout, honestly. You stop wasting your precious cognitive energy trying to forge a completely new trail through this overgrown jungle, hacking at vines and just fighting exhaustion.
Right, because there's a road right there.
Exactly. You realize there is a paved structural road directly parallel to you,
Right.
built by the leaders who came before. Your job is not to pour the concrete. Your job is to drive on that road, but to bring your own vehicle, your own destination, and your own style to the journey.
And the faster you can internalize that framework, the faster you can step out of the exhausting phase of reinvention and accelerate directly into the phase of execution and true mastery.
It completely alters how you view the successful models around you. They are no longer threats to your ego. They are open source code waiting for your specific application. So, as we wrap up this deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final thought to really mull over as you step back into your own projects.
Think about the architecture of your current ambitions.
Yeah.
Where is the friction the highest right now?
Yeah. If you look at the absolute biggest, most intimidating goal you are trying to achieve right now, are you secretly trying to build the entire foundational infrastructure from scratch just to satisfy your own ego? And what would your sprinkle of newness actually look like if you finally gave yourself permission to just surrender to the blueprint today?